All right, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Happy to have you. My voice might sound a little sickly today. I've had a little bit of a cold, so apologize if it does, but I am happy that everyone has tuned back in. I want to talk a little bit today about something I say all the time. I use the terminology all the time, and I think some people look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, it's a phrase and terms that only I seem to associate with. So I want to talk about it a little bit today. And this, it got me thinking about it because I was talking to someone about the animals the other day, the horses, and I said the phrase that I say often, and that is this: you cannot out-train animal instinct. I was talking to one of the girls at the barn about something, and talking about the way horses behave and the way she wants her horses to behave versus the way they do behave, and X, Y, Z. And anyway, we were talking about that, and I said, I was like, look, you cannot out-train animal instinct. And I want to dive into that because I feel like people look at me sometimes like they don't really understand that when they say it. I mean, I train horses. My horses are pretty well trained, not to sound conceited, but like to pat myself on the back, they are pretty well trained. They're well-behaved horses. Of course, they're animals, and they can still be unpredictable, but for the most part, they're really good girls. And they're like, well, you train horses, like, what do you mean you can't out-train animal instinct? And I want to talk about that because it's also so applicable to us as human beings. You've heard me say it on this podcast before. You've heard me use the term animal brain, animal instinct, referring to us as human beings. And that is because our brain, when you think about it, and of course it's much more complicated than I'm going to be able to deliver in this, short podcast, but, when you think about it, you can kind of divide it up into a few parts. And for the sake of what I want to talk about today, let's think about the one part of your brain, which is what we call the frontal cortex. That's the part of your brain that sits in the front of your brain, and it is in charge of thinking about kind of high-level stuff. High-level functioning, executive functioning, problem solving, critical thinking, working your way through stuff logically with thought and intent. That's where the high-level stuff that we do, that's where that stuff comes from. That's where we get our emotional control and regulation. That's where we, regulate our reactions and behaviors. The stuff that, when you think you're doing something high level with a lot of self-control or emotional control or critical thinking, problem solving, that's the part of the brain that all of that comes from. And there's another part of our brain, and again, this is kind of a simplistic overview, but there's another part of our brain, the limbic system is kind of like an all-encompassing term, but that system, that part of our brain is very much, again, this is my terminology to think, the way I talk about it, that's very much your animal brain. You'll hear some people say dinosaur brain, I say animal brain, but that is the part of the brain that, has kind of been around and been working and operating since the caveman days. That's the part of the brain that is just in charge of your basic living. So, there's a part of that part of the brain controls your heartbeat and your breathing, things that you don't even think about, things you don't even do anything about day to day. And It also is responsible for reactions and holding emotions and patterns and memories, sometimes so deep inside of itself that we don't even consciously realize that they're there. And the reason, and this is important to think about, because when you get into the world of why do I react the way that I react to something? Like, why do I respond? Like, why does, like, the same thing can happen to you, and that same exact thing can happen to your neighbor, and the two of you probably are going to respond a little bit differently. And some of that is because deep in that animal part of your brain, deep in that limbic system, deep in the part of that brain that, you know, holds memories and holds and recognizes patterns, like that part of your brain, it utilizes things that has already happened to you in life. So now you're going back to what has happened to you in your childhood. What have you observed in your childhood? What have you observed growing up in elementary school, in middle school? Like, have you had something bad happen to you? Have you had this situation happen to you before? Have you seen this situation happen to people you love? Have you watched shows or movies about a similar situation? All of that stuff, all the memories of that stuff, the patterns that those memories might have created in your mind, any experience that you potentially could pull from that might have happened to you or you might have observed, all that stuff is stored in that that limbic system of your brain. And so when something happens to you, without you even realizing it, that animal brain is digging deep into all those memories, all those patterns, all those files. That's a great way to think about it. It's like a filing cabinet. Like, everything gets logged there in the filing cabinet. And then the next time something happens to you, that part of your brain goes digging through its filing cabinet to try to figure out the best way to respond in order to keep you safe and alive. So imagine if you're taking your car to the mechanic, and every time you go to the mechanic, something happens, like you have an experience, and you log that away in your memory bank, and you're like, oh, next time I go to the mechanic, I'm going to remember this, and I'm going to behave differently because I had this experience. Like, imagine that, except now, imagine that it's happening without you really even thinking about it or understanding it or knowing that's going on. It's all happening in the background. And the files that the animal part of your brain pulls from might be files that you don't even know exist. I mean, this is when you get into people that have childhood trauma and that they don't even remember. Like, maybe something happened to them when they were very, very young, and they don't even really remember it happened, but it happened. And there's a filing cabinet in that limbic system somewhere that remembers that trauma and puts a pattern on it, puts a behavioral experience on it, and says, you know what, next time something triggers me, like next time something happens that might potentially have anything to do with this filing cabinet, that animal part of your brain goes right to that filing cabinet and pulls that file out. It says, well, this is what it was like last time. This is how I'm going to react now because of the way it was last time. And all of that is designed, again, like this is the animal part of your brain. This is the part of the brain that has been around. This is like the most primitive, functions of your brain. Its sole purpose is to keep you safe and alive. And so the reason that part of your brain does that is because recognizing dangerous patterns and how to avoid them is a survival mechanism. Like touching a hot stove with your hand is a perfect example. You touch a hot stove with your hand and reflexively you pull it away. And you learn, instantly after you do that, you learn, oh, I can't ever touch the hot stove again. And our brain, the animal part of our brain, is doing that all the time for us. All the time throughout our life, it's putting little files in its filing cabinet of, hey, this happened this time, and this is how I want to respond next time, in an attempt to keep you safe, in an attempt to keep you alive and well. The problem is, the animal brain is not very high functioning when it comes to critical thinking, logicking things out, problem solving, and regulating emotions. Its sole purpose is to be on automatic pilot, and as soon as something happens to you in your life, automatically scan its filing cabinet, pull out the file that it thinks most closely relates, and then, bam, in a snap of a finger, it wants to make you have a reaction the way that it thinks you should react. And that's where it gets dicey. Like, that's where we run into problems. Because when something happens to us and we have an emotional reaction, that's where the reaction is coming from. It's coming from the limbic system. It's coming from that part of the brain. And it's not always based in truth and logic, and not always what is actually best for us because of that. If we had something happen to us at one point in our life, relationships are a great example for this. Because, we tend, the brain likes to make patterns of things, because by making patterns, it makes it easier to put things in its filing cabinets, right? Like, so it likes, this animal part of the brain likes to find patterns, and it will even sometimes make up patterns if it can't find them, just to make the filing system easier on itself. The relationships are a great way to think about this. If your friend, your partner, your family member, whatever, if they do something to you a couple of times in a row or a handful of times in a row, the tendency for you to perceive that they're doing the same thing again to you the next time continues to go up. Every time they repeat their behavior, the brain stores that as they're repeating their pattern. And then the next time a situation happens, your brain is automatically going to jump to, oh, well, there they go again. They're doing the same thing again. They're doing the same thing they always do. And you see that a lot of times in relationships, and it can be a very triggering thing for people, and really a source of a lot of arguments, because we do that. It's not our fault. This is the way our brain is hardwired, but you will find yourself, like, if your husband doesn't do the dishes 2 nights in a row, like on the third night, it's easy to find yourself saying, you never do the dishes. I always do the dishes. You never help me, never help me. And even though maybe he did the dishes 5 nights ago or something like that, our brains jump very quickly to absolutes and patterns when it comes to the limbic system part of our brain, the primitive part of our brain. It wants to make patterns. It wants to create patterns so it can easily file them. So it can be ready at the drop of a hat to pull from those files and tell you very quickly how to elicit a reaction, how to elicit a reaction. How that animal brain is very helpful when it comes to things that we need instincts for, to things that, if you're in danger, you don't need to think. You need to just act. You need to know that if somebody's breaking into the house, you need to run away. Like, that's stuff that it is healthy for us not to have to think about that, with the frontal cortex, with the high-level thinking part of our brain. It's healthy for us just to react. Same way if we're in a car and, somebody comes into our lane. We don't want to have to go through problem solving and logicking and thinking and all of that higher function to know to get away from that car that's about to hit us. Like, we want, at that point, we want the animal brain to take over. We want the limbic system to take over. We want to just react, we want the animal brain to that point to exactly what it was designed to do and, keep us safe without us having to think about it, like just completely off of emotion and reaction. So, of course, it is there for a reason. Of course, it is important for those reasons. But the problem comes, as with everything, the problem comes when it starts to try to react and on emotion and by, thumbing through filing cabinets, trying to find patterns that probably don't exist. So, it's just trying to make patterns fit so it knows how to have that instant reaction, and that's when it becomes a problem, because now you are reacting to things based on emotion and based on patterns of experiences that have either happened to you or other people that might not even be applicable, but, they're being applied to the situation anyway, and operating on what we call, fight or flight response. So that's the other thing about the animal brain, animal instinct, the limbic system part of the brain that I'm talking about. It doesn't have the problem-solving, critical thinking capabilities like the frontal cortex. So most of its operation is based on fight or flight response. And that's a term most people have heard. But basically it just means if there's something that is threatening your safety, you're going to run away from it or you're going to fight it off. And when we think about fight or flight response, of course it's very easy to visualize and think about, if something's chasing you or threatening you, you're going to either fight or flight. You're either going to fight it off or run away from it. And so that's kind of easy to picture and visualize. But what's more applicable to most of our daily routines is the mental and emotional part of that. And I think that a lot of times is something that people forget. So imagine being, you're in a situation with another person and, that person upsets you. Or maybe you're at a situation at work and something at work upsets you. Or maybe, you're at a stoplight or waiting to turn and somebody cuts you off in your car and, really makes you angry. I mean, those are times where fight or flight also is activated because the limbic system part of the brain, our brain, does not distinguish between a physical threat and what I call an emotional threat. And I want to say that one more time. Our brain does not distinguish between a physical threat and a emotional or mental threat. So the same system, the same cascade of everything that happens in your brain and in your body, if a bear is chasing you, that same system activates if somebody cuts you off at a red light and yells at you, or if your close friend or family member hurts your feelings or does something wrong to you. Like, it's the same. So we have something happen to us. It doesn't matter if it's physical or if it's an emotional thing. Something happens to us. We get scared, we get hurt, we get frustrated, we get angry, whatever it is. Like, an insult happens to us, or something happens to us, and animal instinct is always going to be the fight or flight response cascade. And the reaction from that animal instinct part of your brain is always going to be based on the filing cabinet it has stored way deep down inside that you don't even realize it exists. And you're never going to out-train that. You're never going to get rid of that. And nor do you want to, because as we already pointed out, it's for your own safety in some situations. Like, you don't want that system to go away. But even if you did, you can't make it go away. You cannot out-train it. My horses, for what I consider, my horses are very well-trained horses, and I work on training them. I work on teaching them all the stuff and things. But at the end of the day, if I'm trail riding on them and a deer jumps out in front of us, their animal instinct and their initial reaction that isn't going to be anything that they think about or control, it's just going to happen, is going to be to spook and run away from that deer. And that is their animal instinct. And I cannot out-train that. I cannot undo it. I can't make it go away. It is always going to be there. Just like your reactions, your animal reactions from the animal instinct part of your brain are always going to be there. You cannot out-train them. But what you can do is learn and practice being better at activating the frontal cortex part of your brain when that system kicks in. And that is one thing that you absolutely can control and absolutely can make better. I can't make my horses not want to spook at deer. I can't make them not jump a little or startle a little. But what I can teach them is to recognize when that system kicks on and to recognize when that fight or flight is activated, and then instead of being all the way reactionary to it, pause, turn on the frontal cortex, turn on the part of your brain that is involved in higher level thinking and functioning, and ask yourself, hey, is this a good idea? Like, let me think this through. Let me problem solve here. Maybe I don't need to be animal instinct reactionary in this moment. And that is what I can train my horses to do. And that's what you can train yourself to do as well. And the difference is profound. So in the example of the horses, if I'm on the trail and I'm walking my horse along and a deer jumps out in front of me, left to everyone's own devices, left to full-on animal instinct mode, that horse is going to see that deer jump out, get spooked, do a roundabout, and bolt off full speed in the other direction. That's one way it could go. The other way is if the horse has been taught and is capable of recognizing animal instinct kicking in and then being able to say, wait, let me turn on the other part of my brain and think about this for a second. Then what the situation looks like is we're walking along, the deer jumps out, the horse startles, but before turning around and full-on bolting and running away, he just kind of stiffens for a minute, sniffs the deer, looks for a second, and then you kind of feel the horse starts to relax because the horse is activating the part of its brain involved in higher level functioning, higher level thinking, problem solving, and that part of the brain is analyzing the situation and saying, wait, it's just a deer, there's no reason to run away, let me start to relax, and then hopefully, eventually, we just walk on with our life and everything is okay. And that is what it can be for you in your life too. You are never going to outtrain animal instinct. You are never going to get rid of emotion. Like, emotion is part of that limbic system. And it comes from all the things that we have been talking about, And when something happens to you, your gut reaction, that animal instinct, is always going to be there. It's always going to show up. The way you feel about things is always going to be there. It's always going to creep up. The challenge, or maybe that's not even the right way to say it, the success story comes when we realize that is what is happening. So when we feel that animal instinct trigger, when we feel that fight or flight response triggered, when we feel ourselves wanting to become reactionary based on emotion, instead of allowing the train to get all the way down the tracks, we have to become successful at saying, wait, Paul, let me activate the frontal cortex. Let me activate the part of my brain involved in high-level thinking and problem-solving and logic and critical thinking. Let me activate that part of my brain. Let me assess. Let me look at what's going on. Let me take a minute and let's figure out now how we want to respond going forward. And that is the difference. Like, you don't ever get rid of the urge to be reactionary or the urge to act on emotion or animal instinct. That never goes away. What we get better about is realizing when it's happening and then being able to realize very quickly, wait, this isn't actually a life-threatening situation. I'm not actually physically in danger. Like, this is not the time for my animal brain to be kicking in. Let me activate the other part of my brain. Let me pull in my logical, problem-solving, critical thinking part of my brain. And let me look at it through the lens of that part of my brain. When you can learn to do that, and do it well, and do it consistently, and do it quicker, that is when we really start to harness our minds, harness our mental health, to help make us better versions of ourselves, and, to help us live better versions of our life. And it's not easy. And anybody out there, I'm sure can completely relate. It is not easy when you are emotionally charged about something. It is not easy to activate that other part of your mind because you are fighting against primal, basic functions. You are fighting against a system that is designed to keep you alive and safe. So it's not easy. When you have those emotional surges, when you have things that make you want to react and have big reactions, it is very hard to put the brakes on and bring in that other part of your brain, to help you problem solve and think things through. So it is not easy, but you know what? Nothing worth having. Generally, nothing worth having is easy, and generally, making yourself better and making your life better is also never easy. It takes work, it takes dedication, it takes awareness, and it takes a willingness. It takes a willingness to put in the effort. So, that's my little rant and talk for today. Think about that a little bit as you go through your week. When when you have something happen to you and you feel yourself getting revved up, you feel that fight or flight cascade kicking in with all the stuff it does, and you feel that emotional surge. Just think about this talk a little bit. Think about the visual of the horse on the trail ride. You have two choices. You can go full steam ahead on animal instinct and emotional reaction and, go down that path, or you can pause, activate the frontal cortex, and attack the problem with a higher level of logic and thinking and problem-solving capabilities. All right, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we will talk again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.